The moment I heard the news, my whole body went numb. It felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared, and I was falling into some endless pit. My mother was gone, just like that. No warning, no chance for one last conversation. A minute ago, she was in this world, breathing, existing. And now, nothing. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. I needed to hear a voice, to hold on to something real. My husband. He was my person, right? The one who was supposed to be there for me through everything. So I dialed his number, my fingers trembling. The moment he picked up, I could hear background noise. Work chatter, maybe. He sounded irritated, like I had interrupted something important. "At work," he said sharply. "Don't call over trivial matters." Trivial? I almost dropped the phone. My chest felt tight, like something was crushing me from the inside. I had to say it again, had to make him hear it properly. "My mother just passed away," I whispered, my voice barely holding together. Silence. A long, empty pause. Then just a sigh, annoyed, dismissive. "I'm at work," he repeated, "and we'll talk later." And just like that, the call ended. I sat there staring at the screen, my brain refusing to process what had just happened. Was this real? Did he actually say that? My mother, the woman who raised me, who loved me unconditionally, was gone. And the man I had chosen to spend my life with couldn't even spare a moment, not even a single real word. I waited stupidly for a message, a call back, anything. Maybe he hadn't understood me. Maybe he'd realize what he'd done. But nothing came. Just silence. That was the moment something inside me changed. Something broke. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and made a decision. I wouldn't beg for comfort. I wouldn't explain or remind him why this moment mattered. If he couldn't see it himself, then there was nothing to say. So I put my phone down. And with that, I put down something else, too. Whatever was left of the illusion that he truly cared. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling like someone had punched a hole through my chest. My mother's death had already shattered me, but his words? They were something else. Don't call over trivial matters. I kept rereading the last call, the way it ended so abruptly. No concern, no comfort, not even a basic human reaction, just irritation. As if my grief was nothing more than an inconvenience. I had two choices. I could call him back, try to make him understand. I could cry, beg, explain why this moment was breaking me. I could hope he'd finally realize that I needed him. But then I thought, why should I have to? A husband should know. He shouldn't need to be reminded that his wife is in pain. And yet, there I was, sitting in an empty room, feeling more alone than ever, while the one person who should have been by my side acted like my loss was nothing. The second choice? Silence. And that's the one I took. I put my phone down and just sat there letting everything sink in. The weight of grief, the sting of his words, the quiet understanding that this moment had changed something between us, something I could never undo. Hours passed, and he never called back. Not even a message to check on me. Maybe he thought I was overreacting. Maybe he assumed I would just deal with it and move on. Maybe he didn't think about me at all. I could feel something inside me harden. I wasn't the same woman who had picked up that phone earlier, desperate for support. That version of me had disappeared the moment he chose to dismiss my pain. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and made up my mind. If my grief wasn't important to him, then neither was my voice. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't explain. I wouldn't force him to care. From that moment on, I chose silence. And in that silence, I found my answer. That was the last time I reached out to him. No calls, no messages, nothing. I could have told him. I could have made him understand who she was to me, how much I had lost. But I didn't. He never asked. Not once did he come to me and say, "Are you okay?" Not once did he wonder why I had gone so quiet. It was as if my mother had never existed in his world. And maybe that was the moment I realized I didn't need to let him into mine. So I kept everything to myself. Her name, her memories, her absence. I carried it all alone. And strangely, it became easier that way. I stopped expecting anything from him. No comfort, no understanding, no love. Just silence. Then came the will. My mother had left everything to me. Her house, her savings, even the little things that only had meaning because they were hers. And he had no idea. Because as far as he knew, she was just some distant relative, someone barely worth a mention. I never corrected him. I let him believe whatever he wanted. He never questioned why I suddenly had extra money, why I didn't seem worried about finances anymore. He never suspected that I now had the freedom to walk away whenever I wanted. And that's when I understood something. The power of secrets, the power of holding the truth close and knowing that the other person would never see it coming. Because the truth is, he had already lost me the moment he dismissed my pain. He just didn't know it yet. I never spoke her name again in his presence, not out of spite, but because he hadn't earned the right to know her. She was mine. My grief was mine, and now, so was my future. And one day when the time was right, he would realize just how much he had lost. But by then, I would already be gone. Days passed, then weeks, then months. He never asked. Never once did he look at me and wonder why I had grown so quiet, why my eyes looked empty, why I wasn't the same person anymore. He just carried on, woke up, went to work, came home, scrolled through his phone, slept, repeat. At first, I told myself he was giving me space. Maybe he thought I needed time to heal on my own. Maybe he just didn't know how to comfort me. But as time passed, the truth became clearer. He wasn't waiting for me to heal. He wasn't avoiding the topic out of kindness. He simply didn't care. I started paying attention to the little things. How he never noticed when I spent hours staring at nothing. How he never saw me wiping away silent tears at night. How he laughed at jokes, talked about work, went about life as if nothing had changed. Because for him, nothing had changed. The moment I realized that something inside me cracked. I had spent years believing we were a team, that no matter what happened, we would always have each other. But I was wrong. The truth hit me like a slow, creeping wave. I was alone in this marriage. Maybe I always had been. I tested it once. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, I looked at him and said, "I haven't been feeling like myself lately." A simple statement. An invitation. He barely looked up from his plate. "Maybe you should get some sleep," he said, then changed the subject. That was it. That was the moment I stopped waiting for him to see me, because if he hadn't noticed by now, he never would. And just like that, my grief shifted. It was no longer just about my mother. It was about the life I had thought I was living, the marriage I thought I had. It was about waking up next to a man who didn't even know I was disappearing piece by piece. Or maybe he had never really seen me at all. My mother's will was simple. Everything she had, her house, her savings, the little pieces of land she had worked so hard for, was now mine. There were no complications, no long legal battles, just a quiet transfer of everything she had left behind. And my husband had no idea. He didn't know because he never asked. Not once did he question who she really was to me. Not once did he sit down and say, "Tell me about her. What was she like? What did she leave behind?" So I never told him. In his mind, my mother was just a distant relative, someone who barely mattered. And since I never corrected him, he never suspected a thing. He didn't know about the extra money in my account. He didn't notice when I stopped worrying about finances. He never even questioned why I seemed calmer, more certain, as if I was carrying a secret he couldn't see. Because I was. For the first time in my life, I had something that was truly mine. Something untouched by him, by his indifference, by the cold way he had dismissed my grief. He had spent months ignoring the weight I was carrying, never once offering to share the burden. And now, he would never get to share in the one thing that could have changed everything. I had options now, choices, freedom. And he was completely unaware. Sometimes I would sit across from him at the dinner table, watching as he scrolled through his phone, barely engaging, completely oblivious. And in those moments, I knew this was temporary. This life, this routine, this marriage built on silence and avoidance. One day he would look up and realize I was gone. And when he finally wondered why, when he tried to piece together what he had missed, he would never guess the truth. That everything had been decided the moment he dismissed my pain. That while he was busy ignoring me, I was quietly preparing to leave. That my mother had given me more than just her belongings. She had given me an escape. One morning I woke up and knew it was time. There was no big fight, no dramatic confrontation, no screaming, no begging, no last attempt to make him see me, just quiet certainty. I packed my bags in silence, folded my clothes neatly, took only what I needed. The rest didn't matter. I wasn't leaving behind things. I was leaving behind a life that had slowly stopped feeling like my own. He was still asleep when I zipped up the suitcase, still lost in dreams, unaware that his wife was walking away from him for good. Maybe in another life, in another marriage, I would have woken him up, told him why, given him a chance to understand, but not in this one, because I had spent too long waiting for him to notice me, to hear me, to care. And if he hadn't done it when I was drowning in grief, he wasn't going to do it now. I took one last look around the house. The place where I had once imagined building a future, the walls that had heard my silent cries. The bed where I had spent so many nights lying next to someone who had already lost me without realizing it. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter. No note, no message, just the same silence he had given me when I needed him most. Then I walked out the door and never looked back. The moment I stepped outside, I felt lighter, as if I had been carrying something heavy for years, and now, finally, I was free. The air smelled different. The sky looked wider. For the first time in a long time, I was stepping into a world where I wasn't waiting for someone to love me the way I deserved. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because I had already done all my crying in the months before. By the time I left, my heart was clear. My decision was made. He would wake up and find me gone. Maybe it would take him hours to even notice. Maybe he wouldn't care at all. Or maybe, just maybe, he would sit in that silence and finally understand what it felt like. But by then, I would be far away. Months passed. I had built a new life, one without him. A life where I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into someone else's indifference. A life where I was seen, where I was alive. And then, one day, he found out. Maybe someone told him. Maybe he pieced it together on his own. Maybe he finally looked around and realized what was missing, not just me, but everything he had taken for granted. I wasn't there to see his reaction, but I imagined it. The confusion, the slow realization, the questions. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she fight? Why didn't she ask me to care? Because I shouldn't have had to ask. By the time he figured it out, it was too late. I was long gone, and so was everything he thought he had. The house? Sold. The money? Mine alone? The future he once assumed I would always be part of. Erased. Maybe for the first time he felt the weight of silence. The same silence he had given me when I needed him the most. The same silence I had sat in night after night waiting for something that never came. I don't know if he regretted it. I don't know if he missed me, if he finally understood what he had lost. And honestly, it didn't matter, because by then, I had already found something better. Peace. One day my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something in me knew who it was. I picked up. At first there was silence, then his voice, hesitant, unsure, desperate. He had finally noticed. He asked why I left, why I never said anything, why I never gave him a chance to fix it. His voice had an urgency I had never heard before, as if he was only just realizing that I was truly gone. I listened, let him talk, let him grasp at whatever was left. Then, when he finally stopped, I gave him my answer. I didn't think you'd care. After all, it was just a trivial matter. Silence. Maybe at that moment he remembered his own words, the ones he had thrown at me so easily that day, the ones that had shattered something between us that could never be repaired. Maybe he felt the sting of them the way I had. I didn't wait for his reply. I didn't need to hear his excuses, his regrets, his sudden realization of what he had lost. I blocked him. Forever. And just like that, I closed the last door to the life I had left behind.